It's not like the 1930s when hundreds of thousands of unemployed people marched in the streets demanding jobs. We don't also have job programs to do the needed things to rebuild our infrastructure, which is crumbling, to have subways that work consistently, to have clean parks, to have after-school programs. We don't have any of those things. And so that there aren't these jobs, and men are lost. And what's interesting is they've basically lost hope. A curious thing in the Case and Deaton study is what they call the Hispanic paradox. Usually what happens is the poorer people are, the worse their health outcomes. Now, of course, that's if you have to go to a clinic and wait forever, or you can't afford the health visit, you don't bother until you're terribly ill, and then you go to an emergency room where people don't know you and where you wait forever and so on. And so a very remarkable thing has happened. Hispanic men who are high school educated or less have greater life expectancies every year and less depression, whereas white middle-aged men, Hispanic middle-aged men, are doing better and better. One of the reasons that America's health outcomes are they're the worst in the developed world and among the worst of any country that's industrialized and developed is because this wild discrepancy between the health care of the haves and the health care of the don't-haves, have-nots. And so that what they're trying to figure out, why are middle-aged Hispanic men doing so much better? Why don't they commit suicide as frequently?
And what is the answer?
Why do white middle-aged, non-educated men commit suicide 5.5 times more than Hispanic men of the same age group and education level? And what looks to be the case, certainly for me, and Case and Deaton share this idea, is that for those Hispanic men, most of whom came recently from Mexico or Central America, life is better than it used to be. They're looking forward to being better providers. They're looking forward to a better life for their children. The work that they get is not as well paid, but for them it's much better than what they were used to. And so they have a sense of hope that they're doing better. Whereas
for the white men,
for the white blue-collar male, he's doing worse than he ever expected. And therefore, his sense of himself and his future is different. That's why whites are now the biggest increase in heroin users. They're growing faster and faster in their addictions of every kind. And they're dying more. Those are not healthy, those addictions. And hopelessness is correlated with bad health and depression.
In a sense, this has always been known, that it is not just a measure of what your standard of living is, or your standard of working. It's also how it relates to your head, how you think of yourself, where you are in life or in change. If you think you're on the way up, then you can feel good about a low-paid job, whereas if it's on the way down for you, then the low job is the proof that you're sinking. It's
that you're no good.
That you're no good. And so we can understand how different groups, but it's very interesting that their research led them to see this issue once again in these lights. What do you, as a practitioner, this is then a problem of the individual who's deeply depressed, but also of an economic system that is not treating large numbers of people very well. How do you juggle those two dimensions when you work with the folks that come to see you?
Well, one is that I help those people see the social and political dimension of their suffering, and also what they could do
because
to change it.
Let me interrupt you. You show them the political and social causes, influences producing their suffering. And you do that because what? It relieves them at least of the self-blame part?
It relieves them of the self-blame, and it gives them a basis on which to reach out to others like them and connect with other people so they're less isolated in their pain. One of the things that drives the lower health outcomes is that when you're depressed and anxious, your body responds to a crisis. You know, our crises when we were developing as a species was, you know, a large animal is pursuing us.
Right.
And so therefore, all immunity is depressed. All immune systems go down, and a fight for survival is what happens. Well, if you're stressed all the time, your immune system is shut off.
And you get sick.
And you're much more susceptible to disease, as well as the psychological, social diseases like addiction, obesity, and so on. You know, that opioid addiction is huge in that population, heroin addiction for the first time.
So then working with a person who comes to see you, so that they understand that this is a social economic process, not a personal failure, that this is in fact happening to millions of other people who didn't suddenly start failing, having been perfectly good citizens up until, the last decade or so. This is going to help them avoid the self-destruction, physical and mental, that comes if you're alone, if you're isolated, and if
depressed.
You blame yourself for a problem that really isn't your doing.
And it allows people to connect. I also see couples and explain to them that the women's liberation movement gave women a chance to hope for an expanded role, not to necessarily devalue the nurturing work that they did at home, but to expand themselves into the workplace. But because that work was considered crap, in part by the feminist movement and in part by men beneath them, they didn't learn what they could learn from taking care of a home and making it beautiful, of the excitement of watching children grow and helping empower them. And so that one of the things that couples need is they need to devalue the work that the society hasn't paid and hasn't valued, which is the work of creating a home, of making people comfortable, of emotional kindness, of nurturing of children, of creating creative meals, which would then allow men to not feel humiliated by picking up a greater share of the household labor in terms of the decoration, of the cleaning, of the nurturing of children. And so that instead of a humiliation, which would be taking on some of those tasks, it becomes an opportunity, or it can become an opportunity, which would allow the give and take between men and women to be better. Men's ways of asserting their masculinity won't be going out and drinking with their buddies as much as taking care of their kids and feeling like a good man for it. So that there are both personal ways and also social ways of both understanding what has happened, the callousness of capitalists who see only their own profit regardless of the pain that they're inflicting, and also the opportunity in changing traditional gender roles that would allow marriages and connections to exist and thrive instead of be frayed and destroyed.
If you were given the opportunity to do so, what kind of social changes would you imagine could contribute to dealing with the problem that Case and Deaton have revealed and that your own practice has clearly also brought to your attention?
Well, I would, to reflect some of the work that you do, I would give men in the United States the same opportunity that men in Italy have under the Marcora law, which would be that the government would give them 3 years of their unemployment insurance upfront if they connected with other employed workers and created co-ops. Because often these are very experienced men who really knew what they were doing and could create something useful and wonderful with other people who are unemployed. So that would be one solution. Another solution would be a whole re-education and creating the FDR kind of jobs. If he, for today's economy, I suppose it would be over 22 million jobs instead of the 11 million that FDR created to do the useful things our society needs and is way behind on, whether it's changing the infrastructure, rebuilding the New York subways. I live here, so I'm really aware of that, and having night crews go over the system so that they wouldn't be fixing the rail and changing the switch box by rerouting everyone and cleaning up the stations the way they are in European countries. That's just one example. There's the highways, there's the parks, there's crumbling infrastructure everywhere you look, so that giving people socially useful jobs and at the same time having places where people, families, couples, individuals could go to talk about what's happening to them and connect with others, that they could create something together with those others, whether it's co-ops or anything else.
It would be wonderful, if you think about it, if we had again that WPA type program of the 1930s, perhaps this time setting it up not as government hiring you and you work, but as the government being the midwife of the development of a mass of cooperative enterprises that would say to people, okay, you've got a new life. The old economy can't provide for you. Here's a way that you can go out, set up a business together with other people like yourself, and allow the whole society to see what it's like to have a big cooperative sector to your economy, side by side with the old traditional, and then let people decide. Give the American people, quote, the freedom of choice between these two, and the way to do it, to do this which is good for everybody to have that freedom of choice, by helping these people out of a situation that's not their fault, but is now driving them to a personal hell, if you like. We could do two good things out of this one bad thing that these people are being shunted aside.
There's another thing, too, which is that Denmark, which is supposed to be the most successful economy, and Germany, a wildly successful economy, as well as Sweden, a successful economy, have heavy prices for people to outsource. If you're outsourcing, you have to get someone another job, you have to provide for them, you have to deal with the economic impact on your community and the health impact on your community. So we could stop the free ride of abandoning American workers. But also, in addition to those things, and in addition to the WPA ideology, which is wonderful, I think you need to add a personal thing, because gender relationships are changing. The overwhelming number of women are in the labor force. Women are rejecting men, and you need to really deal with the psychology of personal life in neighborhood organizations and giving people a chance to talk about what happened to them personally, because there's a personal shift and there's personal precarity. In addition to economic precarity, there's a personal terror of not having a future, which is going right along with the economic terror. And in the Hispanic families, that's much less so, because they still have more of the traditional structure. Not that I think that's a great structure, but that they can count on it, and they're looking forward to something else.
You know, the ironies here are endless. In most economics courses, you're taught as though if the corporation pursues maximum profit, it's good for the whole society. You're never presented with the enormous costs of capitalist competition and what it means and what it can do to a community. And nothing illustrates it more than this conversation. We've come to the end of our time. Dr. Fraad, thank you very, very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
And reminding us that to do economics properly, you have to take into account all of its social conditions and all of its social consequences, or else you will not be doing neither the analytic nor your role as a citizen the justice it deserves.